He stood beneath the lights of Berlin, silent, alone, as a billion eyes watched the emperor fall. The 2006 World Cup final should have been his coronation, the perfect farewell. Zinedine Zidane, the maestro of modern football, had already painted the match with a Panenka penalty, kissed into the net with his usual elegance. One last dance before the curtain closed. And then, he turned around. In the 110th minute of extra time, Zidane, serene, dignified Zidane, spun on his heel and drove his head into Marco Materazzi's chest, sending the Italian crashing to the turf. It wasn't a scuffle. It wasn't heat of the moment. It was surgical, controlled, almost ritualistic. The world gasped. Commentators fumbled for words. The referee, after a moment's confusion, reached into his pocket and produced a red card. Zidane walked past the World Cup trophy without even glancing at it. What could possibly provoke such a man, in his final game, on the biggest stage, to snap like that? Was it pride? Pain? A deeper wound that had never healed? It became the defining image of a legend's end. For some, a disgrace. For others, the most human, most honest, most Zidane moment of all. Because when you spend your life dancing through chaos, maybe it's fitting that you leave with one final storm. Zidane's legacy wasn't shattered that night, but it was scarred. And perhaps that's what made it immortal. French football was searching for a new soul. The golden generation had faded, and a fractured nation, torn between its colonial past and multicultural future, needed a face it could unite behind. Zidane, quiet and unknowable, emerged not as a voice, but as a vision. At Cannes, then Bordeaux, and finally Juventus, his feet spoke fluently even when his mouth did not. He wasn't flashy. He was fluid, all first touches and whispered passes. Where others ran, he glided. By the time he arrived at Real Madrid in 2001 for a then-record fee, France's victory wasn't just athletic, it was political. Zidane, the son of North African immigrants, became the face of a new France, one that believed in unity through diversity. Black, blanc, Bur, black, white, Arab, that was the slogan. But behind the slogan, the fractures remained. And Zidane knew it. He rarely gave interviews. He avoided celebrity. He preferred silence, perhaps because he had learned that speaking too freely for someone of his background often came with consequences. In him, the media saw mystery. In his teammates, they saw majesty. But deep inside, Zidane remained a man of moods, calm on the surface, but with an undercurrent of volcanic intensity. That intensity would appear in flashes. A stomp, a shove, a sudden red card in a moment of quiet rage. There were 9 reds in his career, a startling number for a playmaker. But each one felt less like recklessness, more like a code of honor being violated. Zidane didn't lose control. He enforced it on his terms. And that's what made him so beloved and so dangerous. By 2006, Zidane had already retired from international football, his body aching, his generation fading. But when France faltered in qualification, he was begged to return. And he did, like a go summon one last time. What followed was not a farewell tour. It was a resurrection. In Germany, at age 34, Zidane delivered one of the greatest individual tournaments of all time. He dismantled Brazil with the grace of a surgeon and the fury of a warrior. He played like a man who knew the end was coming and wanted it on his terms. And yet, even at his peak, something was brewing. Whispers circled. Zidane was quiet, too quiet. His family wasn't present at the tournament. Rumors said he was tired, that his decision to retire was rooted in more than just age. There was a sadness behind his eyes, even as he smiled. He had carried the hopes of a country, a culture, a continent for so long. And now, perhaps, the weight had grown too heavy. Still, he marched into the 2006 final with his chin held high. On the other side, Italy. Tough, tactically sharp, emotionally ruthless. And in the heart of that defense, Marco Materazzi, a man known for his provocations, his dark arts. Arrogant kiss of a penalty that struck the crossbar before bouncing just over the line. It was audacity wrapped in elegance. It said, "I am still him." But 103 minutes later, Zidane would turn around and unleash the most famous headbutt in football history. What led to it? What exactly was said? What had been building for years? Zidane's rise was never sudden. It was slow, steady, and deliberate, much like the way he moved on the pitch. From the forgotten streets of Marseille to the marble halls of Madrid, he built his kingdom not with noise, but with nuance. At Juventus in the late 1990s, he became a continental force, a Ballon d'Or winner, a playmaker who turned battles into ballets. He wasn't just technical, he was transcendent. But it was in Madrid, wearing the white of Los Blancos, that Zidane became a legend. There, in the Cathedral of Galacticos, he etched his name alongside the Immortals with a left-footed volley in the 2002 Champions League final, a goal that many still whisper about as the most beautiful ever scored. He had it all: skill. Even in the Real Madrid locker room, surrounded by megastars, he remained the quietest figure in the room. But when he spoke, even Ronaldo, Figo, Beckham listened. Because they all knew Zidane wasn't playing the same game as the rest of them. He was painting it. Still, beneath the grace, there was always fire. 9 red cards over a career. Some were for violent conduct. 1 for spitting. 1 for stomping on a fallen opponent. And all of them shared a common thread. Zidane didn't lash out randomly. He lashed out when he felt disrespected. There's an old saying in Marseille: "If you touch my pride, you'll taste my blood." That was Zidane. After the 2004 Euros, having led France for nearly a decade, he stepped away from the international stage. His body was sore. His mind, even more so. Retirement felt right. But then France struggled. The team was leaderless. The federation, the media, even President Chirac wanted him back. And he returned, not for glory, but for duty. The 2006 World Cup became his swan song and a stage for resurrection. France began poorly. Zidane was suspended for the 3rd group game due to yellow cards. But in the knockout stages, he transformed. Against Spain, he scored and orchestrated. Against Brazil, he humbled Ronaldinho, Kaká, and the defending champions with a performance so elegant it felt like time had paused around him. And in the semi-final against Portugal, it was his penalty that sent France to the final. It was as if he had waited his whole life, not for 1998, but for this, one last dance, one final masterpiece. And for most of that final against Italy, he was brilliant again. The Italian collapsed. The world froze. Referee Horacio Elizondo didn't see it, but after consultation and video review from the 4th official, the decision was made. Red card. Zidane didn't protest. He didn't explain. He simply walked off the field, past the trophy, down the tunnel, into history. France lost on penalties, and the conversation immediately shifted from the match to the moment. What had Materazzi said? Rumors flew. Racism? Insults about Zidane's mother? Or worse, about his sister? Days later, Materazzi gave a version. He offered me his shirt. I said I prefer his sister. It was enough. For Zidane, a man of honor, family, and controlled rage, that one sentence was a code violation, an attack beneath the surface. But was it worth the cost? He didn't play another game. That was the end. The fall wasn't just dramatic. It was cinematic. The media split in half. Some called him a disgrace. Others called him a tragic hero. His legacy, they said, was now tainted. But was it? He had already won the World Cup, already claimed the Ballon d'Or, already been etched into football's immortal walls. This wasn't the fall of a man. It was the revelation of the man inside the myth. In the weeks that followed, Zidane remained largely silent. He issued no apology to Materazzi, only to the children watching, saying, "I'm not proud of what I did, but I would do it again." That was the contradiction of Zidane. Beautiful, brutal, brilliant. He ended his career not with a trophy lift, but a red card walk-off. And somehow, it felt more true. Because for Zidane, it was never just about winning. It was about dignity. In the silence that followed Zidane's final match, something lingered in the air, heavier than defeat, more lasting than scandal. It wasn't just about a headbutt anymore. It was about what led to it, and what it revealed about the man the world thought it knew. For years, Zidane had been called the quiet genius, a man of few words and even fewer facial expressions, of expectation. But in that final act, under the Berlin lights, the mask slipped. And behind it, we saw what he had hidden for so long: rage, pain, and the burden of being Zidane. What many didn't know, or didn't want to confront, was how deep the scars ran. From his childhood, Zidane had been the Arab kid in French football, always talented, always watched, always one mistake away from confirming every stereotype the tabloids whispered. His success wasn't just personal, it was political, and he knew it. In interviews years later, he hinted at this tension. I may be French, but I never forgot where I came from. And neither did they. He remembered the slurs in the streets. In this light, wasn't just a reaction to Materazzi. It was a culmination, a final refusal, a decades-long pressure valve finally bursting in the most public arena imaginable. Was it irrational? Of course, but maybe it was also inevitable. In that instant, Zidane rejected the perfect hero box he had been forced into. He chose dignity over diplomacy, pride over politeness. He stayed in control. Instead, others spoke. Materazzi capitalized on the moment. He gave dozens of interviews, shifting versions of the story. And in the swirl of opinions, the truth got lost. Some said Zidane had mental health struggles late in his career, burnouts, anxiety, emotional exhaustion. Some claimed he felt isolated in the national team's final camp. Others hinted at family issues. The absence of his children and wife during the World Cup was conspicuous. Then came the more troubling whispers, ones never confirmed, but always floating, that Zidane had requested not to take a penalty in the shootout, fearing he wasn't in the right headspace. None of these rumors have been solidified, but in Zidane's silence, they echo. And perhaps that's the point. Zidane never let the media define him. He never defended himself in their language. He didn't cry on TV. He didn't beg for sympathy. He walked off, head down but not bowed. Even in disgrace, he remained composed. And that composure, ironically, made the act even more haunting. Think about it. Zidane didn't shout. He didn't throw fists. He turned, walked a few steps, and struck like a hammer. It wasn't a loss of control. It was a decision. In that moment, he didn't milk the drama. He simply disappeared into the same quiet he had always preferred. But something had changed. For many fans, especially those from immigrant communities, those who knew what it meant to be welcome, but not really, the headbutt was not a shameful act. It was a moment of truth, a declaration. Zidane had always carried a code. It's tempting, almost too easy, to judge Zinedine Zidane's career by that final act. The headbutt, the red card, the long walk past the trophy. Because what happened in Berlin wasn't the story of a man losing control. It was the story of a man taking it back. Let's ask ourselves, what do we expect from legends? Do we want perfection, politeness, obedience, or do we want something real, something human? Zidane was never polished for the cameras. He wasn't sculpted in a branding agency's office. He simply played football, and played it better than almost anyone ever had. And yet, from the very beginning, he had to carry more than just expectation. He carried identity. He carried tension. He carried the burden of being acceptable. So when he turned and headbutt Materazzi, was it a collapse or a refusal? A refusal to smile and say thank you while being insulted. A refusal to be the model immigrant who absorbs disrespect in silence. A refusal to walk away from his final match on anyone's terms but his own. Yes, it cost him the ending he deserved. Then walked away. Who lifted France, then carried its scars. Who painted the beautiful game, then shattered the frame himself so no one else could. So let's ask the hard questions. Was Zidane a wasted genius? Or a man who refused to let genius be wasted by hypocrisy? Was the headbutt a betrayal of his greatness? Or the final act of someone who had always been quietly fighting a deeper war? Did we lose a hero that night? Or did we finally see him for who he was all along? At Hall of Legends, we believe Zidane's ending wasn't a fall from grace. It was grace choosing to bleed. There are players whose names fade with the years, whose highlights are played only when anniversaries arrive. But Zinedine Zidane is not one of them. He didn't just play the game. The moment most remember, the headbutt, remains etched like a scar on the skin of the sport. But maybe that's why we still talk about him. Because perfection is forgettable. Still wore his number, still whispered his name like a myth. He became a manager and, as if fate wasn't finished with him, won 3 consecutive Champions League titles with Real Madrid. Quietly, almost as if he wanted to prove one last thing. Even in a suit, I can still control the chaos. But what we miss most isn't the trophies. It's that feeling, that moment when Zidane had the ball, and the world seemed to hold its breath. That strange peace he brought, even when the stadium roared. He reminded us that the game could be soft, that intelligence could dominate brute force, that emotion didn't have to be loud until it was. And in his final act, he reminded us of something else, that even legends are fragile, that beneath the medals and applause are old wounds.